I'm Shrita Singh in my 4th year of my 5-year IDDDP, and my parent department is in energy science while my host department is in chemical engineering. So I'm also opting for an honors. So I will not be getting an M.Tech without honors, but an M.Tech with honors degree. And my specialization is in systems engineering. There's a process systems engineering group at chemical engineering under which I'm doing my M.Tech thesis. So I started considering IDDD around the second semester of my 3rd year, which is a good time to start if you want an M.Tech with honors, which is an M.Tech. You would want to plan out your courses accordingly, and you would also want to consider what kind of project that you want to get into and what kind of guide do you need to have. So around the second semester, 3rd year second semester is a good time to start thinking about your guide and as well as the coursework requirements that would be needed to go into a different department. So I found out about the different courses and the different choices that I have through the department websites. So the energy department website as well as the chemical department website does map out its dual degree programs very clearly. Since I was in energy science, there was no bachelor's degree defined for energy science prior to my IEEE application, and so they had to design their own IEEE policies so as to define what a bachelor's degree would mean in energy science and engineering. So in addition to looking through websites, I also had to contact the DAMP in energy science as well as the DUGC for some more details based on what kind of course requirement would I be looking at if I were to do a DD somewhere else. So once so if you're trying to go into chemical engineering and you're planning to do an M.Tech, you would have to complete your honors requirement as well as 4 extra elective courses that you can choose. So the main honors requirement consists of 2 mandatory courses in reaction engineering and transport phenomena, and then 2 electives that you can choose out of the M.Tech electives list, and then additionally 4 more electives that are based on, it can also be that are based on either the M.Tech electives list or something that is relevant to your DDP that you can decide mutually with your guide. So I think it's very important to understand that a lot of these electives might not be running in certain semesters, and so there is a very high chance that you might start out with a preliminary action plan based on how you will be completing your coursework, which might change extremely drastically as the semesters go on and something's not running in a certain slot or there's a slot clash, and so you would have to revise that plan over and over. And so what I suggest is that you start off with a course, very reasonable course plan that you think you can complete, and then after every semester or before every semester review how it would change based on the slots that you're getting. The exact process of converting to IEEE involved briefly I first had to pinpoint my guide. So the reason why I wanted to convert to IEEE is because had I had an idea of what kind of DDP I need to be doing, and it made more sense to have a DDP with one main guide instead of having a co-guide situation in my own parent department. And so I started off with choosing guides and looking at what kind of work I would want to be doing. Because if I see a DDP requirement, I think that it is more important to also look at your M.Tech thesis, which is going to be the main takeaway from your DD. So I would suggest that you look at guides and look at the kind of work that you want to be investing yourself into. And once you're done with that, you can go on to then mapping your coursework and seeing how you can get an M.Tech in that department. A benefit of energy science engineering is that you are getting a very diverse field of courses. And so if you are from energy science engineering, it is quite helpful, since you will be able to parse a lot of the coursework and the requirements that different departments might be throwing at you, even though it might be a bit more effort and a bit more intensive than the way you learned it in the courses that the department had to offer, uh, that energy science had to offer. You still have a basic introduction to a lot of different variety of topics in electrical engineering, in chemical engineering, and in mechanical engineering. So that is an interesting thing to keep in mind. So once a guide is decided, I would suggest that you look into the M.Tech requirements in your host department, and then start, if you're from energy science, start looking at the B.Tech requirement that energy science would want from you, since our coursework and our DD requirement is not as clear, as we don't usually offer bachelor's degrees. Once this entire process of mapping out your thesis, mapping out your project, and then mapping out your coursework is done, you can then go on to filling in your IEEE application. At which point, I think I do need to emphasize that it is extremely important, since it is an endeavor for our energy science to incorporate a bachelor's degree, they are going to be looking at your application in detail, including the coursework and including the project. So I would keep in mind that you fill out the application in very much detail, and do not leave things out to think that you might be able to plan them later. Uh, So the criteria for awarding an interdisciplinary dual degree in chemical engineering has your thesis, and then four course credits of, so that's 24 course credits of honors, and then 4 additional PG elective courses. If you are to take the honors courses ahead of time, which is what I suggest, do not leave the mandatory honors courses to the last year, because it's possible that you might get a slot clash, or it might be difficult to complete them at the very end. So it's easier to do it in your 4th year, especially if you're from outside the department and you're trying to cope with the mandatory courses. But other than the mandatory courses, I believe the electives are quite varied, and you might find something that interests you. So I did face a bunch of difficulties in the process, mainly due to because since I had started planning out quite early, I was expecting my application and the entire process to be done before the semester begins of my 4th year. And due to the pandemic, a lot of administrative work had been halted, and a lot of more pressing concerns had to be attended to. Other than this, there was also the difficulty of mapping out my bachelor's degree, since energy science does not have a bachelor's degree. And so to map out the coursework that I wanted, I did have to inquire and interact with the energy science DUGC and DAMP team, which were quite helpful once the COVID requirements had decreased on the administrative side. I would suggest contacting your DAMP team if you are in energy science, because that would ease the process a lot, and they would be able to give you your B.Tech requirement in quite detail. Once they did form an IEEE policy, things were quite swift, and administrative action was taken quite swiftly once they got around to it. But I believe before that, there were a lot of more pressing concerns that they had to attend to. Another difficulty that I did face was that once you are done with the process and you're considered an IEEE student, the ASC side of things, they don't really know your exact course plan. So there is a chance that your category might get shifted, or they might not understand why you've opted out of some mandatory courses, or not done certain course requirements. For example, you might have a seminar which is a mandatory requirement in your parent department, but since you're doing an IEEE somewhere else, you do not need to do the seminar in that department anymore. And for issues like that, you would have to come in contact with the ACAD office at times and check your ASE and tell them that, this is my category, or there's been a mistake here, or you're not understanding, please do not give me a backlog. So things like that do arise, but given how, based on how busy ASE is around that time, action is taken, and eventually these small glitches were sorted out. Other than this, when we come to the course requirement in chemical engineering, there is a significant difference in the way things are done, and so there is a possibility that you will have to get used to the department environment. So there might be a certain way or a certain level of discipline or sincerity that is demanded in a certain department, and then another department considers course load and sincerity to be in a completely different measure. So that is something to get used to, but from my experience here, even though the courses are comparatively slightly more demanding than the courses that I've had in my parent department, if enough efforts are put into it, I have been able to cope quite well. Additionally, the mandatory honors courses that are done in chemical engineering are usually taught from scratch. So a lot of concepts in transport phenomena and reaction engineering are revised for the chemical undergraduates there, and so you are able to get your bearings in the first 3-4 weeks of the coursework. Another thing to keep in mind while converting to IEEE, which is an advice from my side, is that the core, what I consider the core of IEEE to be, is the M.Tech thesis. So what I would suggest is that when you are considering to convert to IEEE, keep in mind that you have a good project to motivate you to do so, and it's not really just hopping departments or the label of an M.Tech from a different department, but an extensive project work that you are excited about, because this will account for a huge amount of credits as well as a huge amount of time in your 5th year. And so please be sure that you are going to enjoy the M.Tech thesis that you are going to be doing. And other than that, I believe the administrative requirements as well as the coursework requirements can be helped out, and the faculty at the energy side as well as the faculty in the chemical engineering side has been quite helpful with helping me do that. So yes, that is all.